With me today on CEO to CEO is Dr. Sri Amir Hamza, and I want to say thank you for joining us on CEO to CEO. It's a new initiative that we have at the Exchange to talk about ESG and what it means to us as individuals and to our respective organisations. But I think the first thing I should do, and I have been somewhat tardy despite an original letter that I did send you on your appointment, is to congratulate you on your appointment as CEO of EPF. Keeping my funds safe, because that's where my savings are for my retirement. But I think if I could pose the question, the transition from energy utility into a pension fund. Now, I think it's very interesting because, as our audience will know, Dr. Sri is from Tenaga National Berhad, which is also pivoting green. And I'm sure some of that, I can see your hand is in it. And you're moving into another organisation, EPF, which is actually who we're working closely with in sending the right message to our listed PLCs about how they need to be green. And if you could share a little bit of that journey, I think that would be very, very interesting.
Yes, it's been an interesting journey. A lot of you may know that I've had a little bit of a colorful career in rotating from oil and gas to leisure and tourism, and lastly into Tenaga before EPF. Yeah, and I think this has been an accumulation of different experiences along the way, and that's been very useful coming into EPF with a broad understanding of different business models and stuff. Yeah, because ultimately EPF invests in real companies out there, right? And the challenges that each company will face are key things that EPF must understand as it promotes journeys of what it wants to do. Of course, fundamentally, the most important thing for EPF is making sure that its investments are safe, yeah, and secondly, making sure that the yield that we get is commensurate with the risk that we take, yeah, and fundamentally giving our members the best return that they can get, yeah. But in trying to do all this, it's important for EPF to have some foresight in understanding pivots that happen in the real world. Yeah, and I think one of the big pivots that are happening is this growing push on ESG. Yeah, I think in Malaysia, if you look at the journey, Malaysia started the journey with the G part of the ESG quite some time back, and I think we've matured very strongly on that G part, and I think we can be proud of the systems and processes that we actually have. Yeah, but in the pivot to the E portion of the elements and maybe the strengthening of the S part of the ESG, I think we still have a long way to go in terms of being able to embrace it. So what I am learning and I'm helping to share with my team here at EPF is what's the practical journey portion, yeah? And how do you make it bite? Because we understand that the journey is real. We cannot deny the fact that ESG is here to stay. Yeah? We cannot deny the fact that there's going to be a material shift that the whole globe is pushing through, and Malaysia cannot be left behind. Yeah? But what we need to do is manage the pace and induce the movement in the right form so that we don't do damage to the models that exist while we're pivoting in this area. And I think that's the value transition that I'm enjoying helping EPF to understand.
Yeah, I think, as you know, I also have a fairly varied background before I came to capital market, and that gives us a certain nuance and an understanding of what it takes for companies to embrace and move that thought process, if you like, from, ESG cost to ESG is an investment in the future, which it truly is. And, and at the Exchange, for example, we wear two hats, very much like EPF. We are thinking we have our own challenges as the Exchange to try and meet our commitment to carbon neutral 2022. And then we have this longer term ambition of, net zero for 2050. But I think, the other piece is we have this stewardship function, very much like yourselves, where we need to engage and shift the dial on ESG. So it's this, if you like, environment with COP26 is very topical, but I think, as you quite rightly said, S, social, very fundamental. how we treat each other, how we treat those who are with us. Now, we are, say, the exchange, seeking to reach out to our PLCs because we have FTSE for Good. Now we have 76 constituent members, but if you put a lens of how many PLCs I have, we have some 940. I'm afraid I have some work to do, and I will be enlisting your help to send that good message because clearly EPF is an early adopter of sustainability and ESG investing, and that those mandates begins to, it says, I mean, I appreciate paramount to get the right return, paramount to be safe, so risk-adjusted returns are right. But I mean, from your perspective, how has the ESG journey been so far for EPF? One as an influencer and one as EPF itself as an entity.
I think let's look at it from EPF as an entity, right? And we embraced this journey quite early on. And I think when you think about how we've embraced it, we started from very, very basic concepts about ethical investing, right? So and I think it's quite well accepted that there are sectors that EPF will never invest because it's taken an ethical sort of position that says things like tobacco, things like weapon, gambling, alcohol, pornography, and all that are no-go zones for EPF, right? And that we started quite long ago, more than 15 years ago or something around that time. Yeah. And over time, as we see evolution of these things, we've been very, very strong promoters about getting governance right in a frame. As I said, the EPF, the ESG journey in Malaysia really started with the G portion, right? And the EPF has taken a very, very active role, in making sure that we are part driver of how regulations are changed, part influencer of how our investing companies react. And we chair the Institutional Investor Council, And in doing that, we set tonality. So what we expect institutional investors to do and what institutional investors should be influencing is investing companies to be able to do. And in that journey, we started with pushing a lot of the governance areas, independence of the boards, good governance process, what are the voting procedures, and the like. And we've seen good adoption that's come in. So as we move along that journey, I think you've seen us now move into sustainable investing. And in the sustainable investing sort of side, we're beginning to put out clear guidance in terms of our expectations for the companies. We recognize that there are, from a portfolio point of view, a two-phase portfolio mechanism for EPF. And I think if you look at our asset allocation, a big chunk of our asset allocation is actually in the Malaysia element. Our membership is here, our asset investments are here and stuff. So we have to help this portion also shift. But the net effect of pushing the shift, we have to be very careful also. Because at the end of the day, the ecosystem must be ready to address the shift. In the other part of our portfolio, where we have foreign investment, right? The foreign market is a lot more developed. Our representation is much more smaller. So when we shift along that side, we can take fairly aggressive moves on that side. If we don't see you doing the right thing, immediately I can let go of my shares, and there are no consequences to the market. There's no consequences to individual companies to the end regard, but it's a choice of investing that APF does. But when we start thinking about the Malaysian one, we need to be very careful about how we drive that journey. But we have a role to play in educating the investee company so that they learn to embrace and stuff. And also where we have good practices, we share it in to see it. So what we want from our investor company is actually to see them adopt, embrace that there is real change that's coming into place, and begin to map out their journey in a better platform. And when we see that sort of behaviors, we know they're reacting in. And I think that's the thing that EPF does. It does in real actions by choosing to invest in or take out. But it also does by actually educating, sharing, pushing, nudging companies to move in the right direction.
No, I think, I think that's the key. I mean, often there's a conversation, particularly in the regulatory space, carrot stick. Do we mandate? Do we encourage? Now, clearly, I think that there is a piece around taxonomy and so on. We'll touch on that later. But I cannot, applaud what you're doing, EPF, in leading by example, then more importantly, in giving positive encouragement, because that then moves and makes it easier, because bearing in mind, corporations' primary purpose is profit. And that definition of profit is fairly short term. When you have that sitting in your constitution, or what you and I probably remember as memorandums, articles of association, it becomes more of a challenge, particularly for if you're an entrepreneur-driven company. It is, I have to make this investment, but why? If you have, if you like, your shareholders reaching out to you and saying, I think you need to be thinking a bit longer term than just what the current window that you're looking at, it begins to actually get people thinking, and it's all about. We talk, and you quite rightly said, it's that pivot, that transition to green, and how do we do it in a way that allows us to embrace the new opportunities that ESG is giving us as an economy, but allowing Malaysians as a whole to go on that journey together. And as a trading nation, I firmly believe, also for the the smaller market and companies that aspire to be listed, they need to embrace it and really embed themselves in the supply chains that are green and actually displace. I see this as an opportunity that probably comes, well, they say once in a lifetime, and it really is once in a lifetime. Now, we are seeing that portion, but clearly institutional investors, their mandates around ESG, it's becoming more and more. We have large firms such as BlackRock saying their mandate is we don't have brown assets anymore. They're working on timelines. We're seeing banks talking about not funding brown assets. EPF members, the public at large. And as a member myself, I be honest, I look at the dividend, and that's my number one interest. And I'm asking less about how that dividend is earned. That must be a challenge for you. Because our retail, we find our retail investors are not making. If you like, they're as consumers, they're beginning to understand green. They're thinking green, but are they ready? Are they ready to, if you like, put their wallets on the line, so to speak, and encourage long-term sustainable solutions?
No, but who says return and ESG are mutually exclusive? It's not, yeah? Because fundamentally, when you look at organizations, right, you look at companies and so on, they don't run companies for a very limited time, right? They have to design a sustainable business that will create a business model that will be able to generate income and growth and all over time. And the reality is the trend about ESG is here to stay, because we all live in a very, very small ecosystem. Yeah, what we here in Malaysia has a massive effect on other people elsewhere. Similarly, they do has a massive effect here, right? It's been the world getting smaller and smaller, and the pronounced effect becomes much more real. Hence, the desire to make sure that everybody plays with a reasonable deck, everybody plays and do things in a reasonable manner, that we look after to make sure that the future is sustainable, is a trend that's being born. And what we've seen also from the EPF point of view, good companies who actually understand that and look at long-term balance in it is much more sustainable from an economic point of view also. Yeah, because then we reduce the risk of things like stranded assets. Yeah. Then we reduce the risk when events starts to percolate. Yeah, and the market quickly adjusts. Yeah, that the company doesn't get trapped. And we've seen that, right? From a Malaysian point of view, I think we've seen assets in the plantation sector, right? That we has been artificially held back at this point of time, yeah, because there are real concerns about ESG, yeah. Well, we have issues not only on the climate area, but also along legal practices and so on, yeah. So if you are in good practice mode, then you don't have this as a constraining factor for you, right? Yeah. So practicing ESG is not mutually exclusive. about giving good returns. Yeah, and I think this is becoming stronger and stronger over time. So from an EPF point of view, when we look at our investments, we look at investments from a good business model point of view. We look at investments from the ability for it to generate yield and the ability for it to sustain against ESG practices to make sure that they're compliant along the way. And before we actually take that step, and I think that's part and parcel of good, responsible investments going forward.
I can't agree more. I mean, in our mind, the exchange, very much when we engage, is we need to be building long-term profitable companies with increased value, and particularly given, if you like, EPF's weight in the market, and quite rightly said, you can't pivot quickly because it will have dramatic effects. And therefore, as you position yourself as medium to longer term, quite rightly so, although there are, if you like, trading opportunities in larger markets offshore for yourselves. Now, from, if you like, an EPF perspective, when we look at investee companies, what would you like to be, or what would the team at EPF like to be seeing to address investors' concerns around sustainability? Now, we anticipate, I think I was looking at a little piece of research, by 2030, nearly 100% of all mandates will be ESG related. It will be a binary filter. So perhaps today there is a ESG alpha, if you like, but in not the too distant future, we'll actually say, well, if you're not in this space, you're not investable anymore, and we're seeing that. Now, is the call to action being heeded? Do you think?
Yeah. I think the reality is that if I look at it from a Bursa side point of view and the Malaysian market point of view, I think the Malaysian market has woken up to the belief that ESG is the trend that we all have to embrace. Yeah. The only question that exists today is actually pacing of how hard the embrace is at this point of time. Right? And the key for us is actually to figure out how we can push the pace in a better form without damaging that shift from a permanent point of view. So if you look at EPF, as I said, we began our journey from very, very simple things, ethical to sustainable investing. We put in screens and stuff like that. Yeah. So what we're doing now is actually active engagement with our investing companies. In the process, educating them of our stand. So we're coming up with sector policies to say that this is what in this sector, the key risk issues that we actually see. What we look forward to is hearing from the investing companies, what are you doing against the policy that we're putting out? What are your active motion to get that? Now, if you can see commitment to do it. Now, if I look back at what the journey from a TNB point of view in the past, right? I think everybody was very concerned about TNB because fundamentally the footprint on carbon was very, very high. Yeah. But this year we've seen some good encouragement, right? Where TNB has committed no more greenfield coal plants putting up. That's a step. It's a shift in the right direction. Yeah. Commitments in terms of coming to carbon neutrality by 2050. Putting the stake in the ground is the first most important element that we want to see come out from it. So what EPF actually is trying to do with this sector policy is laying the foundation in terms of parameters that we will believe are acceptable for our investing companies to do. And then in the conversations that we have with them, we want to understand their marker in the shift. Now, we appreciate that it's impossible to pivot overnight. Yeah? But having a clear commitment and having clear steps of how you are going to get there is more important to us to be able to believe that this is the right direction. And if you are moving in the right direction, so we want to support you in that journey. And how do we support you? That means if there were fundraising that's going to be done subject to the good yield, we'll support you. Yeah, our investments will continue to remain within you or grow within you because we like to see it along the way. But if we do see things don't fit in that mode, and we begin to take protective steps, because ultimately what we have to do is make sure my members interests are well protected, right? We don't want to end up, when things, like you said, it becomes at some point binary, right? Yeah, it's a precursor. If you don't have it, you're out. Yeah, and we don't want that to happen to our investments, right? So in that process, by laying the policy, being very clear about it, having good engagement, we can lead the investing company to the right state. But ultimately, it's for the investing company to do. And ultimately, when we've made that clarity, that transparency, and so on, and we see the right movement, we support. And if we don't see it, then we start to ease off. And if we see really very bad behavior, we exit along the way. I think that's fair, right?
Oh,
we make it
balance.
transparent. If we don't do, then it's not what we did, it's what you've done along the way.
And I think you've just hit the nail on the head. We all seek to empower, we seek to perhaps provide some guidance, but at the end of the day, the responsibility rests with the board and management. And the board and management need to embrace it. And I think I do like the point you made. I mean, what do they say? Journey of 1,000 miles starts with first step. And actually putting the stake in the ground is the most fundamental piece, because once you say we're going to do it, that call to action begins. And that's what then moves it forward. Then, if you like, there's either a top-down or a trickle-down approach. The organisation begins to embrace it, begins to talk about it. It begins to look at supply chain management. It looks at all its touch points. You begin to actually looking at where you sit in the world and what you're doing to the world as we pursue pursue a little bit of value, a little bit of profit, because that's why we exist as entities. Now, I'll be honest, I've run out of questions.
So,
what else would you like to talk about, sir?
Let me share with you something else that EPF is trying to do, right? So, while we want to put out, and we put out sector policies, we become transparently clear in terms of what our expectations are of our investing companies, and we demand transparency, we demand KPIs to be put into management scorecards, the boards, and so on. What we also do is active promotion. Yeah. In this instance, EPF is going out and creating mandates, whereby ESG related investments are supported. Yeah, because we can find areas that as I said, who says returns and ESG are mutually exclusive, because we believe that right element will give good returns. Yeah. So we're creating mandates with that element to support that. And that's a positive reinforcement to the market, right? As we give our external fund managers those mandates, we look for these things, we support growth in a better form. So you'll see EPF going out with those mandates given, money put into the sectors and so on. The second thing what we actually want to do is we want to empower our membership, that they also have control of it. And you know over time that EPF has actually given access to members above a certain level to be able to take control of their investment, right? And they can invest in unit trusts and so on. And you'll see us also move, following what the government has actually done and the protocol, to lean investments toward the green area, but also to empower our memberships to be able to do. So EPF will be looking at how we can do that, where members are actually given an opportunity to invest in unit trusts that are SRI compliant and stuff. And stuff. So that will facilitate a lot of things. So that positively moves Malaysia, not only from rules, transparency and stuff, but active investment, because now liquidity is provided into the market. Yep. Okay? And I think that's a very important lubricant to make things faster, to make things managed.
No, I can't agree more. I mean, velocity, you then have, if you like, individual members also begin to influence decisions and outcomes. It actually creates more momentum. And that momentum is fundamental, because if not, it becomes, I always talk about ESG being an abstract thought, but it's not. It's actually, you can break it up, you can look at it, and you can understand it. And I mean, that's the conversation I have with the smaller PLCs, is if you want to be on EPF's radar, you need to grow. And you need to grow and show superior returns in a sustainable manner. And therefore, let's look at that transition and how all of us in the ecosystem can support it. So at the end of the day, if we have, if you like, members utilising their funds to actually invest in SRI compliant mutual funds, and that will then just add to that velocity and that call to action. And I think it really is a call to action. I mean, you and I are singing the same song, if you like, although our voices are different, but the lyrics are the same, if I may be so bold to say. But the key thing then becomes is we walk the talk as ourselves, wearing our hats as entities. We then also encourage and provide support. And that's very much what we're seeking to do with the exchange, is through Bursa Sustain and engagement with institutional investors such as EPF, is actually understand and get the feedback. And what can we share with PLCs to not so much the naysayers, but if they're sitting on the fence and, I think the momentum is increasing, and that call to action is, we've always been very strong on the G, but we're now talking about the E because of COP26. But we'll come back and we really do need to address the S and sort of inclusiveness, because that's our call to action. So if I may, thank you for your time today. I mean, it's always a pleasure. Again, thank you for the support in this space. And anything we can do, we will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Umar, for having me here. Yeah, I think the Bursa has been a great partner for us in the journey. Yeah, and we hope and we pray that we all will grow in the right form together and make Malaysia a marker for the world, right? And showing that we are not a small player out there. We're progressive in our approach. We understand we're responsible in what we do. And people here are given as wide opportunity as they can to manage their processes, to take views and to do actions in the right form. Yeah, and I think we can do that and make an impact in the world.
No, I think we have a role to show leadership. I have been quoted as saying we have wonderful virgin forests. We are not a heavy polluter, and we can show the way. We need to actually engage and have conversations and actually begin to embrace, and if you like, earn our seat at the table to talk about what is ESG, what are standards that make sense. We're very, we're all within the community very concerned about CPAM. That's a call to action for us. And let us show that leadership that I know we will be showing at COP26.
Very good. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Have a great one.